Hello again. Today I'm going to talk about a few more women-only villages, which I think are really interesting. Although I do not consider them, properly speaking, matriarchies. I believe that they implement matriarchal precepts. But I think an actual matriarchy, as in an egalitarian matriarchy, a matrifocal social system, has to include men who are part of it as well. And the important thing in those cultures is that the men and women are trained, culturally trained differently than we are in a patriarchal system. I think it's more a case of they are trained to believe in power with rather than power over. And that's my differentiator right now. As far as whether a group or a culture is matrifocal, matriarchal or not, is whether it has enough of a social system in place that men too are able and willing participants of it. In most of the female-only towns I'm aware of in the world, the reason that they are female-only, well, female and their kids, is because these are usually women that have been abused badly enough by the patriarchal culture that surrounds the town, that the women have either banded together for self-protection or have been kind of shooed off in that direction, or it's been a war and all the men were killed. I think there is one case of that. But these towns are fascinating and encouraging and to me, and full of hope, because these women get together and when it's just working for themselves rather than just supporting a man, which is what a patriarchal culture ordinarily wants, they tend to make lovely, healthy, vibrant, beautiful communities. And I think that's a lovely thing. I'd love to see more of it. So previously I mentioned Umoja, which is in Kenya, and I think it's Al Samaha, which is in the Aswan area. And there was one more in Africa that I wanted to mention, which is called Jinwar. It's in northeast Syria. And apparently, hang on just a moment, I want to slide it. I have some data here that I just wanted to make sure that I shared with you. Oh yeah, this is cool. They welcome women with their kids of any faith. It's open to anyone who is a victim of abuse. It's open to widows with children. And the community was committed to the principles of democracy, ecology, peace, and diversity. And it also welcomes women that are just trying to escape from a capitalist patriarchal society. And their faith and their ethnicity doesn't matter. These women all work together. This is one of the reasons that I think women should be listened to more in the world today, because I think women actually know how to create peace. They know how to negotiate and thoughtfully compromise with each other. And from the fact that we're having war after war after war, I don't think men are as good at it as they think they are, you know? So there's that. The really cool thing about Jinwar is that there's about 50 buildings. It started in, I'm not sure exactly when it started, but I think it's like a generation old also. And they have the houses, all of the buildings are built by the women themselves. All of the buildings are built by them. They have houses, they have a school, a community garden, playground, library, bakery, and natural health center. And they also have an academy. And they actually teach both the girls and the boys in the academy because they feel that education is the answer to a better life for women, which I strongly agree with. That's one of I love learning new stuff. If you hadn't noticed that, you weren't watching closely. But anyway, so the other thing that's interesting to me is that I mentioned some in South America, and it turns out they do exist. My memory was good. It was Colombia. The town is called Unión Matriarca, which I think translates as matriarchal union or group matriarchy. And they're mostly women who are escaping domestic violence, abuse, war, things like that. There's also a Brazilian town that's inhabited only by women. And I don't know if I'm going to say this right, but I'm going to try. Noiva do Cordeiro. And it's really interesting also. The fascinating thing, oh, that's interesting. The town's name translates to Bride of the Lamb, which I think says that it's probably pretty Christian. I don't know. But it's got about 600 women living there. These towns don't usually tend to be, if I understand correctly, don't usually tend to be quite that big. I know that the one in, what was the first one? Kenya, that's it. I know that the one in Kenya, I think it has 15 or 18 families in it. So that's one of the things that they don't, that's a good way to put it. They tend to be sustainable with the land that's surrounding them. They don't tend to overwhelm their environment. One of the things that I think is very significant about these towns is that they tend to be peaceful and beautiful, well cared for, clean, and the women are trying their best to live a good life. I wish we did that more in our towns, in the United States. So anyway, that's probably enough about female-only towns. I find that very interesting, number one, because it's fascinating to see the difference between these towns and towns in the surrounding area. And also because I was trying to figure out the definition for matriarchy, even when I mean egalitarian matriarchy. And the fact that these towns in these strongly patriarchal areas have to be women only says to me that men are being trained not to work with women by the patriarchy, but rather to assume that the women will work for them. And that's why the towns have to, of necessity, be female only if they wish to be run by the women. And, clearly these women have lived in male-dominated towns and were not well supported by it and chose to move on their own and live their own lives. So, as far as I'm concerned, more power to them. They're doing a great job from what I can tell, and I hope their towns thrive despite the hostile surrounding environment. Whew, okay. One drink break later. So, like I said, the women-only townships, I think, are based upon matriarchal precepts, even if they're doing it unwittingly. The concepts seem to be very common to social groups of whatever size, which are run by women. They are, I'm saying too much. I'm really sorry about that. I'm going to try and work on not doing it as much. So, like I said, I don't believe those are actually matriarchal, even though they are egalitarian. I think it's women's resistance to an oppressive patriarchal structure, which is designed to silence women and empower men by oppressing women. And what I think is important is to realize that women are not just male support systems. They should be able to speak for themselves. They should be able to work for themselves. And frankly, one of the reasons I think they make very good heads of family is because when women make money, their first thought is generally, how can I help my children? And let's keep in mind, this is a generalization. There will always be outliers because human beings are incredibly diverse and they're all different. So what we're looking at is a generalization here. Generally speaking, I guess the better way to put it would be to put statistically, women tend to focus excess money on bettering life for their children Unfortunately, statistically, men tend to focus excess money on making life better for themselves. So that's why I think women probably make, in many ways, a much better leader of the family than a man generally will. And I think the reason that men are presumed to be the head of the family is biblical in origin, in at least the United States. Men have led families, like, for example, in ancient Greece, and that was all about the patriline. But what I'm talking about here right now is in the United States, and I think the reason that I say that I think it's biblical is because of the story of Eve in the Bible. And the really interesting thing about the story of Eve is that it's not actually well translated. And that's honestly not surprising, consider that the people that were doing the translations were all men. I realize this is probably a contentious thing to say, but it has been my experience that Christianity is a religion by men, for men, and run to support men. So, for example, if you take the story of Eve, many people will point to well, God made Eve as a helpmate. The reason that's a poor translation is helpmeet is a crushed together word. It was supposed to be help meet. Meet in the sense of M-E-T-E, which is an archaic word which means suitable for. And so what it should have been translated as is God saying that he was going to make Adam a helper that was suitable for him, a help meet for him. What's even more intriguing is if you go back to the original Hebrew, the word that they're translating as helper, I don't know how it's pronounced in Hebrew, but I know when it's written out in our alphabet, the alphabet used in most of the English-speaking world, the word is Ezer, E-Z-E-R. And what's really fascinating about this word is that it's not always translated as helper. Frequently it's translated as savior. And what makes it really intriguing is that Adam is trying to find someone to be with him amongst the animals, because that's what God trotted past him at first. And when Adam doesn't find anyone suitable, that's when God says, well, we'll find you, what I think is, well, we'll find you a savior that is suitable for you. In the sense, and this is my headcanon, okay, so, I mean, if you want to talk about Hebrew, you should talk to somebody who actually studies Hebrew. I am not a Hebrew speaker. I have not studied it intensively. What I've done is I've gone online and looked at simultaneous translations of the Bible where they show the actual written text and then they show it written out in as it would sound in English, and then they show the translation below that. So you can look at it and you can say, wait, I don't remember that word meaning this thing in English, and you can look it up elsewhere and you can research it yourself. And I like that, I think that's fun. So I know I'm easily satisfied, but anyway, so where was I with this? Oh yes, so that says to me that Eve was a lot more interesting and powerful than the early church fathers wanted us to think of her, if she was the savior of Adam. It's also interesting because you see another mistranslation when the verse is talking about God taking a rib from Adam to make Eve, which is kind of diminutive, it's just one bone. She was made out of bone. But if you look at the original, a better translation would be that God took from Adam's side. And there are people who feel, let me rephrase that. There are scholars who feel that Adam having Eve drawn from his side meant that they were peers, and at the very least, and that's why it was mistranslated as rib, to make it sound like she was merely a small piece of him rather than an equal part. But what I was speaking of when I was saying it's my headcanon is I feel that Eve is the savior of Adam from being like the animals, just being brutish. And in a sense, their names also say that. For example, if you translate Adam, it means red earth or red dirt. But if you translate Eve, it means life, or the mother of life. And that makes sense to me if you stop and think about logically. When God is creating the world, he's going from small things to ever greater things. Each thing he makes is more marvelous than the last thing. So if God is creating on an ever-increasing valuation of worth, then the last thing that he makes should be the most perfect, the most marvelous, the closest to him. Well, the last thing that God makes is Eve. So that also, to me, in my headcanon, says that Eve is the savior of Adam. Now, keep in mind, I'm not Christian. I'm looking at this from a more intellectual, well, let's be fair, intellectual entertainment for myself perspective. And I'm just sharing some of the things that I found that I thought were interesting. There's a lot more interesting things about Eve as far as I'm concerned. But again, if that's something that you want to hear more about, drop me a line in the comments, because I'm going to have to pause here because I just realized I'm running out of time. So I had a great time doing this. I hope you had a great time listening. We'll talk more later. Bye-bye.